Have you ever wondered why humanity's absolute greatest successes so often lead directly to our downfall? Really think about it for a second. If you look back, our history is just littered with these brilliant, highly innovative societies that seemed completely and utterly unstoppable, right up until the exact moment they completely collapsed. So, what's the actual mechanism behind this?
Well, to figure that out, we kind of have to look backward. The author Ronald Wright puts this perfectly in his book, A Short History of Progress. He says that the ruins of past societies hold the exact diagnostic data we need to survive today. It's like they are fallen airliners, and we are the ones holding their black boxes. If we can just read the data, we might actually avoid the crash ourselves.
Welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we are digging into a totally fascinating dual mystery. We're going to bridge the massive macro-physical collapse of ancient empires with the invisible micro-physical psychological burnout that's happening inside our own minds right this very second.
Here is our map for the explainer today. 1. The illusion of progress. 2. History's fatal progress traps. 3. The modern burnout society. 4. Freedom as a disguise. 5. Useful versus subtle progress. And finally, 6. Escaping the progress trap.
Section 1. The illusion of progress, when forward becomes backward. Okay, so let's dive into this by challenging a very old assumption, the idea that historical change always moves in one direction toward improvement. We really need to understand Ronald Wright's concept of the progress trap. This basically happens when our human cleverness turns into recklessness. We invent a really smart solution to a problem, but then that solution scales up and creates an even bigger crisis. And worse, it's a crisis that we are either unable or just stubbornly unwilling to solve.
To really visualize this, let's look at a timeline from the Stone Age. Back then, humans developed highly efficient hunting weapons. And hey, at the time, this was incredible progress. It meant way more food, way less time spent hunting, and it actually allowed for the birth of art and complex culture. But the trap snapped shut. Those weapons were so efficient that early humans literally wiped out the megafauna. Our own cleverness destroyed our primary food supply, which then led directly to a cultural decline.
Section 2. History's fatal progress traps. Ecosystems and empires.
This exact pattern builds and repeats across human history. We constantly see civilizations that expand relentlessly, consume everything around them until they literally eat away their own foundations. Easter Island and ancient Sumer are brilliant, if tragic, examples of this irony. Easter Island famously cut down every single last tree just to build and transport those massive, glorious stone statues. Meanwhile, Sumer engineered these massive irrigation systems that ended up totally poisoning their soil with salt. But you know what the most astonishing part of this is? In both cases, the people could actually see their environments dying right in front of their eyes, but they flat out refused to stop their grand projects. They just kept accelerating right off the cliff.
Section 3. The modern burnout society. The collapse within.
Now, we are going to completely pivot from the planetary scale and zoom way inward. We're going to apply a framework from the philosopher Byung-Chul Han to see how this exact same dynamic of unchecked growth is currently destroying us psychologically. Historically, human threats were what Han calls immunological. Think of invading viruses or rival armies. It was a threat coming from the outside. But today, Han argues that our primary threat is actually the infarction. It's not an infection, it's a blockage. It's an internal systemic crash caused by a total saturation of excess positivity. Just too much of everything, too much growth, too much stimuli, too much relentless activity. To really grasp this shift, we have to compare the old world with ours. The philosopher Michel Foucault famously described the old world as a disciplinary society. It was strictly governed by the word should. It had firm rules, limits, and external bosses telling you exactly what to do. But today, we live in the achievement society. It's governed entirely by the positivity of the word can. It constantly whispers in your ear that you have limitless potential, that you can always do more, be more, and optimize every single part of your life. And that brings us to the profound paradox in Han's quote here. Honestly, it's wild when you think about it. Our greatest modern triumph is our individual freedom. We don't have absolute monarchs forcing us to go out and labor in the fields anymore. Yet Han argues that this very freedom is the exact mechanism driving us into total exhaustion. We actually use our own freedom to endlessly compel ourselves to work harder and harder.
Let's break down what this modern worker, what Han calls the achievement subject, actually looks like. Basically, we act as entrepreneurs of ourselves.
We're driven to endless self-optimization, we're constantly multitasking, completely caught up in a state of hyperattention. But Han points out a really fascinating detail here. Frantic multitasking is not some advanced evolutionary step forward. Actually, scratch that, it's a total regression to wild animal survival. Think about an animal in the wild eating its prey. It constantly has to shift its attention around to avoid getting eaten itself, right? By stripping away our capacity for deep, quiet contemplation and rest, we reduce our existence to mere survival. Today we call it hustling and we reward it with cool coffee mugs, but historically, it's just called bare life.
Section 4. Freedom as a disguise. The internal labor camp.
So this brings us to a massive, crucial shift in how power actually operates over us today. It seamlessly blends freedom with coercion, and it does it so effectively that we don't even realize we're being controlled. Han calls this psychopolitics. It's essentially a really smart form of power. Instead of punishing you for saying no, psychopolitics seduces you by constantly saying yes. It uses positive emotions and the incredibly alluring promise of unlimited freedom to make you voluntarily hyperproductive. Overt class struggle, where you fight the boss, has effectively been replaced by an inner struggle against ourselves.
Let's just walk through how this incredibly tragic sequence plays out. First, you feel the absolute rush and freedom of limitless potential. It feels great. Second, you internalize the demand that you must always be improving. Third, you become both the master and the slave at the exact same time, and because you're the one giving yourself the orders, you don't rebel against it. Finally, the system crashes. You suffer an internal infarction. The trap completely snapshot, and the result is total burnout. You end up exploiting yourself way more efficiently than an external boss ever could, simply because it feels like freedom.
Section 5. Useful versus subtle progress. The value clash.
To really understand why this internal collapse hits certain people in society so much harder than others, we need to bring in philosopher Pascal Chabot. He distinguishes between two fundamentally different types of human advancement. He calls them useful progress and subtle progress. Useful progress is the economy. It's science, it's technology, it builds incrementally. Like we invent a microchip, and the next generation takes it and builds a better one. It is highly, highly valued and monetized. But subtle progress, that is human care, empathy, and health. It's raising a child or comforting a sick patient. It doesn't build incrementally. You can't automate it. It has to start completely fresh from zero with every single human life. And as a society, it is chronically, massively undervalued.
The really vital takeaway here is that the relentless, non-stop economic demands of our achievement society, that useful progress, just constantly, heavily crushes down upon the fragile, repetitive sphere of subtle progress. Because of this massive value clash, people working in care experience what is essentially a system-immanent form of violence. And because women have historically been massively overrepresented in this sphere of subtle progress, they disproportionately bear the brunt of this specific structural burnout. It is an incredibly heavy burden.
Section 6. Escaping the progress trap. Living on the interest. Okay, so we've thoroughly diagnosed the illness. Now let's talk solutions. How do we actually diffuse both the ecological progress trap and the psychological burnout trap? Synthesizing all the data from our sources gives us a really clear path forward. Psychologically, Han argues we absolutely have to reclaim the courage to simply stop. We need autonomous inactivity. We have to reclaim the concept of the Sabbath. And I don't just mean a day off so you can recharge to do more work on Monday. I mean setting a hard boundary that completely separates your human identity from your labor. And ecologically, Ronald Wright points out that we have to learn to live on nature's interest rather than continuously, greedily drawing down its capital. Whether it's in our own minds or out in the environment, our long-term survival absolutely requires us to embrace limits.
Let's quickly jump back to that brilliant opening metaphor. We have the black boxes, you guys. The people of Eastern Island and ancient Sumer, they didn't have a recorded global history to warn them. They couldn't pull up millennia of data to see the progress trap closing in on them. But we can. We are literally the very first civilization with the historical awareness required to pull up the nose of the airplane before we crash.
Ultimately, it all comes down to how we choose to interpret freedom. Are you going to continue viewing freedom as the endless, totally exhausting pursuit of more, acting as your own worst internal taskmaster? Or will you choose what might be the ultimate freedom? The freedom to set a limit, the freedom to contemplate, and the freedom to simply stop. Take a good look at your own daily hustle and seriously ask yourself which path you're on. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this sparked some profound curiosity, not just about the world around you, but about the world within you. See you next time.